My retirement party felt like a funeral. After 35 years in logistics, I should have been celebrating. Instead, I watched my wife Jen scroll through her phone while my colleagues made speeches about my dedication and hard work. She wore that tight black dress, the one she saved for special occasions. But her eyes weren't on me. They were on the exit door, calculating her escape. My daughter Claire sat beside me, squeezing my hand under the table protectively. At 28, she had her mother's wisdom and none of Jen's selfishness. She leaned close and whispered, "Dad, she's not clapping for you. She's clapping for the finish line." I forced a smile and cut the cake shaped like a delivery truck carefully. My boss handed me a gold watch engraved with my name and years of service. Everyone laughed at inside jokes about late shipments and coffee breaks. The room buzzed with warmth and friendship. But all I could hear was Jen's fingernails tapping against her phone screen like a countdown timer. When the party ended, Jen kissed my cheek with cold lips that felt like ice. "Congratulations, honey," she said in a voice that sounded rehearsed and hollow. "Now we can finally relax and enjoy life." I nodded and smiled, but my stomach twisted into knots. Something was very wrong here. I woke up to complete silence. The bed felt too big, too empty, like a lake without water. Jen's pillow was stone cold and abandoned. "Jen?" I called out, patting downstairs in my bathrobe. The kitchen was spotless. Too spotless for comfort. Her coffee mug was gone from the counter. Her magazines, her vitamins, her stupid decorative candles that cost $50 each. All gone without a trace, like she'd never lived here. I opened our bedroom closet with shaking hands. Half-empty hangers swayed like skeletons in a graveyard. The safe in our bedroom stood wide open, completely emptied of cash and jewelry and important documents. My heart hammered against my ribs as I grabbed my phone and checked our joint bank account. The balance showed $0.00, with recent withdrawals highlighted in red. A sharp knock at the door made me jump out of my skin. A courier stood there with a thick manila envelope and a clipboard for signatures. "Marty Cole?" I signed with trembling hands. Inside were divorce papers, already filled out in neat handwriting. Her signature was elegant and confident. Mine was still needed at the bottom in blue ink. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Dad, you need to see this right now." I clicked the link she sent. Jen's Instagram profile filled my screen like a punch to the gut. There she was, grinning like a lottery winner in front of a luxury apartment building I'd never seen before in my life. The caption made my blood freeze solid. "Officially single and $210K richer. Lesson of the day? Don't marry men who still use paper maps. # divorce glow up, too naive to notice." I didn't rage, I didn't scream. I didn't throw things or punch walls like men do in movies when they're betrayed. I just smiled bitterly, walked calmly to the garage, and pulled out a folder labeled Contingency Plans in my careful handwriting. 3 months ago, I'd started preparing for this exact moment of betrayal. Not because I'm paranoid or suspicious by nature, but because I'm careful and observant. Jen had been working late too often, buying expensive clothes we couldn't afford, taking mysterious phone calls in the backyard at midnight while pacing nervously. I drove straight to Daryl's office downtown. My lawyer had been expecting this call for weeks, knowing what was coming. "She took the bait," I said, settling into his expensive leather chair. The office smelled like old books and coffee and success. Daryl nodded grimly and adjusted his glasses on his nose. "The joint account? Cleaned out completely. Every penny, exactly like we thought she would do." He opened his laptop and pulled up several files we'd prepared months ago. "Good thing we moved everything else 6 months ago. The trust fund for Claire is completely untouchable. The LLC holding the family land is bulletproof. She got the decoy money, enough to feel victorious and powerful, not enough to actually matter in the long run." I stared out his window at the busy street below, watching normal people live their normal lives without betrayal. "She called me naive on social media." "That's deeply ironic," Daryl said with a dry chuckle. "She just stole 10% of your actual net worth and thinks she hit the jackpot." The family land was my secret weapon that nobody knew about except me. 200 acres of rolling green hills that my parents left me, which Jen always called worthless dead weight whenever the topic came up. She'd roll her eyes and sigh dramatically whenever I mentioned visiting the property. Who wants a bunch of old trees and rocks? But last month, the county development office called with interesting news that changed everything. They wanted to buy half my land for a new shopping complex and residential development. The initial offer? $3 million cash, no financing contingencies needed. I'd kept completely quiet about the offer from the county. Jen was already shopping for designer handbags and expensive jewelry with money we didn't actually have in our budget. If she knew about the potential land deal, she'd demand immediate control and probably spend the money before we even got it or make terrible decisions. Now, sitting alone in my empty house, I called the county development office back with my final decision. Mr. Cole, we've been patiently waiting for your final decision on our generous offer. I accept the deal, I said firmly. When can we meet to sign the paperwork? Next week works perfectly for us. Are you sure your wife doesn't need to co-sign the documents? I smiled for the first time in days. Actually, she's not on the deed at all. The land belongs entirely to me. Never was in her name, never will be. The silence on the other end of the phone was absolutely golden and worth the wait. My phone rang during dinner time while I sat alone. Jen's contact photo, one I'd taken during much happier times, lit up the screen like a ghost from the past, haunting me with memories. "Hello there, Marty." Her voice dripped with fake sweetness and false concern. "I hope you're adjusting well to your new situation and finding ways to cope." "I'm managing just fine, thanks for asking about my well-being." She laughed, sharp and cruel like broken glass cutting through the air. "I'm sure you are. Look, I want you to know this isn't personal at all. We just wanted completely different things from life and couldn't compromise." "We?" I asked carefully, knowing the answer already. A long pause filled with guilt and secrecy. "I mean, I wanted different things. You'll be perfectly fine living on your pension and Social Security. Maybe you can find someone who actually wants to talk about crossword puzzles and boring old war movies all day long." My jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. "Is there anything else you needed to discuss with me tonight?" "Just that I hope you don't make this divorce process difficult or messy for both of us. The paperwork is completely straightforward and fair to everyone involved. Sign it quickly, and we can both move on with our separate lives and be happier." She hung up without saying goodbye or showing any remorse. I sat there listening to the empty dial tone, then walked slowly to my desk. I pulled out another thick folder, this one labeled Phase 2, in my careful handwriting with today's date. Inside were photographs, detailed bank statements, phone records, and a precise timeline I'd been building for months of careful investigation. Jen thought she was 3 steps ahead of me. She had absolutely no idea I was already standing at the finish line, waiting for her to stumble. Claire visited the next morning, carrying coffee and fresh donuts from our favorite bakery downtown. She looked completely exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes from worrying about me all night. "I have something important to tell you, Dad," she said, settling carefully at my kitchen table with obvious hesitation. "I saw Jen 6 months ago. She was at Romano's restaurant with a man I didn't recognize. They were holding hands and kissing like teenagers in love." I nodded slowly, not surprised at all by this revelation. "Howard Garrett. He's a local investment broker who thinks he's smarter than everyone else in town." Her eyes widened in shock and disbelief. "You already knew about him and their affair?" "I hired a private investigator back in March when things seemed suspicious. Howard's been secretly managing Jen's hidden accounts for months. They both think they're incredibly clever and sneaky, but they're not as smart as they believe." Claire shook her head in disbelief and disappointment. "Why didn't you confront her immediately when you found out about the cheating?" "Because confrontation gives guilty people time to cover their tracks and destroy evidence that could help us later. This way, they kept digging their own graves deeper and deeper without realizing the consequences." I showed her the thick investigation report with detailed evidence. Clear photographs of Jen and Howard at expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, and real estate offices. Text message screenshots between them. Detailed financial records showing suspicious money transfers and secret account openings over several months of careful surveillance. "She's been planning this betrayal for almost a full year," I explained calmly to my daughter. The retirement party was just her perfect exit cue to make her move. Claire squeezed my hand tightly with love and support. "I'm so sorry this happened to you, Dad." "Don't be sorry for me, sweetheart. I'm about to get the very last laugh in this situation." Monday morning, Jen called her real estate agent to discuss selling our house. I know this because I'd been quietly monitoring our shared family phone plan for months. She wanted to list the property immediately for a quick sale. The confused agent called me an hour later with questions. "Mr. Cole, your wife wants to sell your house, but there's a significant legal problem. Your name isn't on the property deed anymore." I smiled and sipped my morning coffee. "That's absolutely correct. I transferred full ownership to my daughter's business LLC last year. But Mrs. Cole insists she has legal rights to the property. I suggest you check with your lawyer immediately. She has zero claim to property she doesn't legally own." That same afternoon, Jen stormed into my house without knocking or asking permission. Her face was bright red, her hands shaking with pure rage. "What did you do to our house?" she demanded loudly. "I protected it from people who might try to steal it," I said calmly. "Would you like some coffee?" "Don't play stupid games with me, Marty." I poured myself a fresh cup, completely ignoring her explosive anger. "The house belongs to Claire now. Complete legal transfer, properly signed and notarized months ago." She stared at me like I'd suddenly grown a second head. "You can't do that to me." "Already did it. Feel free to check the county property records yourself." She slammed the front door so hard that every window in the house rattled violently. While Jen threw her dramatic tantrum, I was busy working on other important matters. Over the past 12 months, I'd quietly and legally moved all our significant assets into different legal structures that protected them completely. The family house went to Claire's business LLC. My entire pension went into a special annuity with Claire as the sole beneficiary. The valuable family land trust was completely ironclad and untouchable. Every single transfer was totally legal, properly documented, and completely irreversible under state law. Daryl had helped me understand the critical timeline. In our state, assets moved more than 6 months before any divorce filing are generally protected from division. Jen's public Instagram post was dated yesterday. My careful asset transfers were completed 8 full months ago. She played herself perfectly, Daryl said during our Tuesday morning meeting. By waiting until after your retirement party to file papers, she completely missed her legal window of opportunity. What about the money she stole from our joint account? Joint account funds are considered fair game during divorce, but that's literally all she's getting from this marriage. I looked at the detailed itemized list. House, completely protected. Land, completely protected. Retirement accounts, completely protected. Investment portfolio, completely protected. Life insurance policies, completely protected. Jen had stolen exactly 10% of my actual net worth and thought she'd won the lottery jackpot. Howard was desperately avoiding Jen's constant phone calls and increasingly frantic text messages. I knew this because Claire's friend worked at his investment firm and kept us updated on all the office gossip and drama unfolding daily. Apparently, Howard had confidently promised Jen they'd live together in his expensive downtown condo after her divorce was finalized, and the money came through. But when she showed up with packed suitcases and moving boxes, he claimed he needed space and time to think about their relationship and the future. Jen was staying in an overpriced hotel downtown, rapidly burning through her stolen money on room service, shopping sprees, and expensive spa treatments to maintain her lifestyle. Her Instagram stories showed designer handbags and champagne bottles, but I could clearly see the growing panic in her eyes and forced smiles. Her divorce lawyer had delivered the devastating bad news about asset protection. Most of my wealth wasn't legally considered marital property anymore under state law. She called me Thursday night, obviously drunk and increasingly desperate, slurring her words slightly. "Marty, I think I made a terrible mistake with everything. Can we please talk face-to-face about our situation?" "Talk about what exactly? I thought you were happy with your new life." "About us. About our marriage and what we had together." I was confused and scared, but I realize now that I made some poor choices and... "You realize the money's all gone and Howard doesn't want you anymore." Long silence filled with shame and regret. Then, it doesn't have to be like this between us anymore. You're absolutely right about that. You could have been honest with me instead of stealing from me and humiliating me publicly. She hung up immediately without another word. 20 minutes later, she was knocking insistently on my front door like a desperate woman. I let her inside because I genuinely wanted to hear what excuse she'd offer me tonight. Jen sat on the couch we'd bought together 10 years ago during happier times, looking much smaller and more fragile than I remembered her being. I panicked about everything in my life, she said quietly, tears starting to form. The marriage felt stale and boring every single day. Howard made me feel young and exciting again, like I was worth something special. I made us both tea and listened patiently to her sob story. She cried about feeling trapped in a boring life, about watching me retire while she was still only 42 years old with dreams unfulfilled. She talked about dreams and ambitions she felt she'd given up for our marriage and domestic responsibilities. I never meant to hurt you personally, Marty, she finished, with tears streaming down her face in genuine remorse. But you definitely meant to rob me blind and leave me with nothing. Her face immediately hardened again, showing her true character underneath the tears. That money was legally half mine anyway, under marital property laws. The joint account, absolutely true, but you thought you were taking everything I owned and leaving me destitute. She left an hour later, promising to make the situation right somehow and fix the damage done. I waved goodbye from the window, then went to my desk and made detailed notes of everything she'd said during our conversation tonight. Daryl was systematically collecting documentation, not necessarily for court, but definitely for leverage in negotiations ahead. Every conversation, every text message, every social media post was building a clear picture of someone who'd carefully planned and executed a calculated betrayal against her husband of 30 years. The real bombshell discovery came the following week during my regular financial review. While carefully reviewing old bank statements, I discovered something truly alarming that made my blood boil. 6 months earlier, someone had taken out a substantial loan for $50,000 using both our names as legal collateral without my knowledge or consent. The problem was obvious and infuriating. I'd never signed anything or agreed to any loan in my entire life. I called the bank immediately and demanded answers from the loan department manager. They faxed me copies of all the loan documents within an hour for my review. My signature was clearly forged, but expertly done by someone who'd been practicing my handwriting for months. The money trail was crystal clear and damning. Loan funds went directly to Howard's personal investment account, then disappeared completely into some high-risk scheme that had collapsed spectacularly and lost everything. I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the obviously forged signature that looked almost perfect. This wasn't just adultery and divorce anymore. This was serious criminal fraud that could result in prison time. I made multiple copies of everything and drove straight to Daryl's law office downtown for an emergency meeting. "This changes everything significantly," he said, carefully examining the documents with a magnifying glass and taking detailed notes. "Forgery is a felony in this state with serious consequences. What are my legal options here? Can we prosecute them both?" "Report it to the proper authorities immediately without delay. The bank will launch a full investigation. Howard will completely panic when investigators start calling." I thought about Jen's tearful visit, her desperate promises to make things right and fix everything. "Do it," I said firmly without hesitation. I didn't report Howard directly to police or file criminal charges immediately. Instead, I sent copies of the forged loan documents to the Securities and Exchange Commission with a simple, factual note. "Please investigate potential securities fraud and document forgery in this matter." No personal accusations or emotional language. No demands for specific action. Just documented facts and evidence for their review. Within days, Howard's phone was ringing constantly from different government agencies. SEC investigators don't make casual social inquiries or friendly check-ins. When they call your office, it means someone's professional career is about to explode in spectacular fashion. Claire's friend reported that Howard was absolutely freaking out at work, hiring expensive criminal lawyers and avoiding all his regular clients completely. Jen tried calling him dozens of times every day without success. He never answered once, not even to explain. Saturday morning, she showed up at my door again, this time with red, swollen eyes and completely smudged makeup from crying. "Howard won't talk to me anymore," she said desperately, voice shaking with fear. "His assistant says he's dealing with serious regulatory issues and can't take personal calls." I shrugged casually while sipping my morning coffee. "That sounds unfortunate for him and his business. Did you do something to him? Did you report him to someone?" I protected myself from criminal fraud and document forgery. If that affected Howard negatively, maybe he shouldn't have committed fraud in the first place. She stared at me in complete shock and disbelief. "You're not the same man I married 30 years ago." "No," I agreed calmly with a slight smile. "I'm much smarter now and harder to fool." Jen's luxury condo dream was rapidly collapsing like a house of cards. The expensive apartment she'd bragged about on Instagram was actually a short-term rental she couldn't afford long-term with her dwindling resources. When the monthly payment came due, her dwindling bank account couldn't cover it or the associated fees. She'd burned through the stolen money faster than I'd ever imagined possible for one person. Designer furniture, expensive spa treatments, a failed attempt to start some kind of lifestyle blog, it all added up quickly to financial disaster. By month's end, she was back in a cheap roadside hotel, posting increasingly desperate Instagram stories about temporary setbacks and exciting new opportunities coming soon that nobody believed. Her followers were starting to ask uncomfortable questions in the comments section. Comments like, "Thought you were rich now?" and "What happened to that fancy apartment you were showing off?" filled her posts with doubt. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and genuine pity watching her fall. This was the woman who'd called me naive, who'd planned to publicly humiliate me while stealing my entire life savings and retirement. But watching her crumble wasn't as satisfying as I'd expected it to be. It was just sad and pathetic to witness. Jen fired her first lawyer and hired someone completely new and aggressive, Marcus Webb, a courtroom shark who advertised on late-night television with dramatic commercials. He promised to fight aggressively for every penny and get her substantial monthly alimony payments for the rest of her life. Webb filed extremely aggressive legal motions, claiming I'd illegally hidden assets and emotionally abused Jen throughout our marriage with controlling behavior. He demanded immediate spousal support and exactly half of all property acquired during our marriage over 30 years. Daryl read the filings with obvious amusement and professional confidence. This guy's fishing in a completely empty pond with no fish. What's our response strategy going to be? Very simple and straightforward. We show the judge our detailed timeline with documentation. Every asset transfer was completely legal and finished months before she filed for divorce. Her own Instagram post proves the marriage was over when she announced it publicly with celebration. Webb had made a critical tactical error. He'd assumed I was currently hiding assets from the court. He had absolutely no idea I'd legally moved everything beyond his reach almost a year ago with proper documentation. This court case will be fun to watch, Daryl said with a confident grin. The mysterious anonymous envelope arrived at Daryl's office on a Tuesday morning via overnight delivery. Inside was a flash drive containing a crystal-clear audio recording of Howard talking to another woman at a downtown bar after work. "Jen?" Howard's voice was perfectly clear and unmistakable. "She's just a hot distraction for me, nothing more serious than that. Woman thinks she's getting half of some big retirement fortune, but the old man's broker than she realizes. I just needed her to help me access that loan money for my investments." The unknown woman laughed knowingly. "So you're just using her for money?" "She's using me too. Or trying to anyway. But I'm definitely not leaving my wife for some desperate housewife having a midlife crisis and making poor decisions. Let her figure out her own mess alone." Daryl listened to the recording twice carefully with headphones. "Where did this come from exactly?" "I honestly have no idea at all," I said truthfully to my lawyer. "But I strongly suspected Claire's private investigator friend had something to do with it somehow. We kept the recording in reserve for court proceedings. If Jen's lawyer tried to paint her as an innocent victim, we'd let Howard's own words tell the real story about their relationship. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with old wooden benches and fluorescent lighting overhead. Jen sat with Marcus Webb, wearing a conservative blue dress and minimal makeup to look innocent. She was playing the role of wronged wife perfectly for the judge and jury. Webb painted me as a controlling husband who'd maliciously hidden assets to punish his younger wife for wanting independence. He showed the court my asset transfers, claiming they proved premeditation to defraud Jen of her rightful share of marital property. When it was Daryl's turn, he calmly presented our detailed timeline with supporting documentation. Your Honor, Mr. Cole legally restructured his assets 8 months before Mrs. Cole filed for divorce. These transfers had absolutely nothing to do with marital dissolution. They were standard estate planning for retirement and family security. He showed the court Jen's Instagram post blown up on a large screen. Mrs. Cole herself announced the marriage was over. She bragged about stealing money and called her husband naive. This isn't a case of hidden assets. It's a case of attempted theft and public humiliation. The judge studied the evidence very carefully, taking detailed notes. Jen shifted uncomfortably in her seat, avoiding eye contact. Furthermore, Daryl continued with confidence, we have solid evidence of actual criminal fraud committed by Mrs. Cole against her husband. Webb objected loudly and dramatically, but it was too late for damage control. The forged loan documents were already in evidence and properly authenticated. Claire's testimony was absolutely devastating. My daughter spoke calmly about years of watching Jen manipulate and belittle me. She threatened my father once for buying me a birthday gift, Claire said clearly. She said he was wasting their money on his ungrateful daughter who didn't deserve it. Webb tried to object, but the judge allowed the testimony. She made him feel guilty for every purchase, every act of kindness, but she spent freely on herself, expensive clothes, jewelry, spa treatments. My father worked for 35 years to build their life together. She treated it like her personal piggy bank. Jen's face was stone, but I could see her hands trembling under the table. Claire described the months of strange behavior. Late nights, secret phone calls, expensive purchases Jen couldn't explain. My father isn't vindictive, Claire finished strongly. He protected his assets because he saw what was coming. He gave her every chance to be honest. Webb's cross-examination was weak. He couldn't challenge documented facts. Lydia Martinez had been my neighbor for 8 years and knew our family well. She was a retired teacher, sharp and observant with an excellent memory. When Daryl called her to testify, I wasn't sure what she'd say about our private lives. I saw Mrs. Cole with another man several times from my kitchen window, Lydia said clearly to the courtroom. They would meet in his car outside her house while Mr. Cole was at work during the day. Webb stood up quickly with an objection. Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay testimony. I'm not repeating what someone told me, Lydia replied firmly with dignity. I saw this with my own eyes from my kitchen window while doing dishes and cooking meals. The judge nodded approvingly at her directness. Please continue with your testimony, Mrs. Martinez. The last time was when Mr. Cole was recovering from his knee surgery at home. I brought him homemade soup because Mrs. Cole wasn't home taking care of him like a wife should. I saw her car at the Marriott downtown with the same man I'd seen before. Lydia's calm, grandmotherly presence carried weight the judge couldn't ignore or dismiss. Webb's desperate attempts to discredit her only made him look foolish and unprofessional in front of everyone. Mr. Cole is a good man, Lydia concluded firmly. He didn't deserve this betrayal from someone he trusted completely. The judge's ruling was swift and brutal for Jen's case. No alimony payments, no claim to protected property or assets. Jen was responsible for repaying the fraudulent loan, with interest and penalties that would take years to satisfy. Mrs. Cole announced her own divorce on social media while bragging about stolen money, the judge said sternly to the courtroom. This court cannot reward such behavior with additional financial compensation from the wronged party. Webb looked stunned and defeated, shuffling papers uselessly. Jen sat frozen, tears streaming down her face as reality hit her hard. Furthermore, The court strongly recommends the district attorney investigate potential criminal charges related to the forged loan documents and fraudulent signatures, the judge continued with authority. I felt no joy, no triumph, no satisfaction from her pain, just deep relief that it was finally over and justice had been served. Outside the courthouse, Jen tried desperately to approach me for one last conversation. Webb grabbed her arm and pulled her toward his car before she could speak. They drove away in complete silence, both knowing they'd lost everything. Daryl shook my hand firmly with professional satisfaction. Clean victory for our side. What happens now? Is this really over? She'll appeal, but she has no legal grounds for reversal. This is over, Marty. You can move on with your life. Howard's arrest made the front page of the local newspaper 3 weeks later with a large photo. Investment broker charged with multiple fraud counts, read the headline in bold letters that everyone could see. The SEC investigation had uncovered multiple criminal schemes spanning several years. Howard had been using client money to fund personal investments, forging documents, and promising returns he couldn't deliver to unsuspecting victims. Jen tried to sue Howard for the money she'd lost, but her lawyer discovered something devastating for her case. Howard was claiming Jen had orchestrated the entire scheme against me from the beginning. She brought me the forged loan documents, Howard told investigators during questioning. She said her husband would never notice the missing money. I thought it was legal spousal access to marital funds under state law. It was a complete lie, but a clever one that protected him. Jen couldn't prove otherwise without admitting to fraud herself and facing criminal charges. Neither of them was believable anymore to anyone who knew the facts. The judge in Howard's criminal case dismissed their mutual accusations as the desperate finger-pointing of co-conspirators trying to save themselves. Howard went to state prison for 5 years. Jen faced civil lawsuits from his other victims seeking financial compensation for their losses. I sold the house 2 months later, but not before one final surprise that Jen never saw coming. Every valuable fixture, the marble countertops, the custom cabinets, the designer light fixtures, came with me to my new place as personal property. Technically, they were personal property, not part of the house structure itself under legal definitions. I replaced everything with basic alternatives from the hardware store that looked decent but cost much less. The new buyers got exactly the house they'd agreed to purchase according to the contract. Jen got absolutely nothing from the sale proceeds or any future appreciation in value. I moved into a smaller place near Claire's family where I could see my grandchildren regularly. The marble countertops looked absolutely great in my new kitchen and reminded me of better times. Packing up 30 years of marriage was strange and emotional for someone my age. I found old love letters Jen had written early in our relationship, back when she still believed in us and our future together. I threw them all away in the garbage without reading them again. Some memories aren't worth keeping when they've been poisoned by betrayal and lies. The land deal closed in September with all parties satisfied. Half my property became a state wildlife preserve with a visitor center named after Claire's mother, my first wife who died too young. The other half stayed in my family, protected in the land trust forever for future generations to enjoy. I used part of the money to set up college funds for Claire's children and their future education. The rest went into conservative investments that would support me comfortably for the rest of my life without financial worry. Standing on the preserved land, watching deer graze in the morning mist, I felt peace for the first time in years of turmoil. This place would outlast all of us. The betrayals, the court battles, the broken promises, and shattered dreams. It would just be beautiful, wild land where families could walk and remember what mattered most in life. The visitor center would teach children about nature, conservation, and the importance of protecting our environment for future generations to appreciate and enjoy. Lydia and I started taking evening walks around the neighborhood together after dinner. Nothing romantic, just two people who understood loss and healing from life's unexpected betrayals and disappointments. She'd lost her husband 5 years earlier to cancer after 40 years of marriage. I'd lost my marriage to greed and lies after 30 years of what I thought was love. We didn't try to fix each other's pain. We just walked and talked about books, gardening, grandchildren, and simple pleasures. "You're different than you were a year ago," she said one evening as we watched the sunset. "How so? What do you notice that's changed?" "Stronger. More sure of yourself. You walk taller now." I thought about that observation carefully. Jen used to make me doubt everything. What I thought, what I remembered, what I deserved from life. I forgot who I was underneath all her criticism. "And now you remember who you really are?" "Now I remember that I'm worth more than I thought." We walked in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink like a watercolor painting done by nature. Jen's final letter arrived on a Tuesday morning via certified mail. No return address, but I recognized her handwriting immediately from years of reading her notes and cards. "Marty," it began, "you destroyed my life completely, and I hope you're happy with your revenge against me." She blamed me for Howard's arrest, for her financial ruin, for her isolation from friends who'd seen through her lies and manipulation. She called me vindictive, cruel, calculating, and worse things I won't repeat here. She never once apologized for stealing from me or forging my signature on legal documents. She never acknowledged the pain she'd caused me or our family through her selfish actions. I read the letter once, then walked to the fireplace in my living room. The paper caught fire quickly, curling into ash within seconds and disappearing forever like our marriage. Claire found me there an hour later, staring at the flames. "Everything okay, Dad? Just clearing out old mail that doesn't matter anymore," I said with a peaceful smile. Some conversations aren't worth having, even with yourself or in your own mind when you're alone. I sit on my bench every morning now, looking out over the preserved land with my coffee. The visitor center is busy with families and school groups learning about local wildlife and conservation efforts. This morning I opened a letter from Claire with exciting news. Inside was a photo of her baby son, my grandson, taking his first steps in their backyard while reaching for his mother's outstretched hands. "I hope I raise him with half your wisdom, Dad," she'd written in her careful handwriting. Wisdom. That was a new word for describing what I'd learned through this painful experience. I didn't set out to destroy Jen's life or seek revenge for her betrayal. I just refused to let her destroy mine and take everything I'd worked for. The difference between revenge and protection isn't always clear from the outside looking in. But I know the truth. I didn't push Jen off a cliff to hurt her. I just stopped standing at the bottom to catch her when she decided to jump. My phone buzzes with a text from Lydia. "Coffee ready when you are, and fresh muffins too." I fold Claire's letter carefully and head home to start another day. The past is over and buried. Today is just beginning with new possibilities and hope for the future.